Welcome back to my 12th Zoom series episode. That's right, we're at number 12. I am so stoked to be back here again with the guest that started us all off, Matt Wiscombe, and this is my 12th episode of my Zoom series for my capstone after the play ends, hanging the cleats up. Super stoked to be here. And for a little teaser of what you guys are going to hear today, me and Matt are going to dive into some of our favorite moments from the previous episodes. We're also going to talk about some of our biggest takeaways and some of the things we think are the most important to share with retired collegiate athletes or athletes going to retire. I'm also going to dive into why I decided to do this Zoom series and why I wanted it to be a Zoom series. I've gotten a lot of questions on that, so I thought I would clear that up. And I'm also going to explain why I picked retired athletes to focus my whole entire capstone on. So, Matt, we don't have to start off by asking about your background because we do know your background, but would you like to give a little refresher?
Sure. First, I just want to say the series has been great. It's crazy that we've come full circle, and I wanted to ask you how you feel like the series has been.
I am super excited and also very grateful for how it has gone. I think I came at this very like going through the motions almost. I was like, this is something that I obviously have to do. So I was like, okay, like let's just interview these people, see what happens. But I've actually really enjoyed it. And coming from an almost retired collegiate athlete, basically retired, but I feel like retired next month when I graduate. Like it's official in May. I'm old in May, but I'm just grateful for the advice that everyone has given and for the time everyone has taken. I am so appreciative for how easy it was to collaborate with all of my Zoom guests and how amazing they were and how everyone was just so willing to help me and it was so amazing. But it just shows how supportive athletes are and how supportive that community is. Um, before we get into what I want to talk about first, would you like to remind the audience a little bit of your background in athletics?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to get to that.
Okay.
So yeah, I grew up playing soccer. That's pretty much the only sport I played. I played soccer growing up in Utah as a little kid, and then moved to San Diego, where I would consider I played the most competitive soccer in my life. And after high school, I stopped playing and did a service mission and then haven't really jumped back into the game too much. So that's where I'm at right now.
Yes. But now you did have some opportunities playing college. So that opportunity was there. You also could have pursued a community college role somewhere in Utah, somewhere in San Diego. But since you didn't, we're sitting down here today, and that's why we're chatting. Um, But I'd love to first start off by jumping into um, one of our previous Zoom guests that you know quite well, just a little bit, just
Hmm.
kind of know him. Your brother, Ben Wiscombe. And his interview was great. And he has a famous line from his interview that I'm sure a lot of people who have watched every episode would remember because I think it's very memorable. My mom texted me after this episode actually and said how she loved how blunt that Ben was in this exact um, moment, but also throughout the whole thing because real life is very blunt, real life is very real. So she really appreciated his bluntness. And I had asked Ben, what advice do you have for any current athletes struggling to continue their sport or to continue doing something athletic? And he said, don't. If you don't want to do something, then don't do something. And I had, I think mostly what advice I would hear when I would ask that question was there's light at the end of the tunnel, like it gets better and yada, all this stuff. And that's things that I've heard so much as an athlete. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that quote, along with any moments you think you've embraced that advice since stopping your sport.
Well, that was probably the most Ben answer you could have gotten out of him. He's a very blunt person, but he's very sincere in what he meant.
Hmm.
I feel like he probably went through some difficult moments in his career where he kind of like as he explained, you know, he stepped away from it for a little bit, and
Hmm.
then as he came back, he realized, okay, maybe this is what I still love, and I figured out why I still love it.
Hmm.
Um, but I really feel like from his response, I feel like it would work for a lot of people to just not
Yeah.
keep pressing forward with their sport. But I recall a moment in my career where I broke down in the kitchen talking to my dad about it because I was having a terrible high school season. I think it was my sophomore year. It's terrible, or sophomore junior year, but I was just ready to call it quits. And so I took some time to reflect and think, and I just went, "You're crazy. How could you just call it quits
Yeah.
and stop playing something that you've put so much time and effort into?" And so for me, walking away and not playing really wasn't my an option. But
Hmm.
that's my perspective because I took a step back, like Ben said to do, and kind of weighed out my options.
Hmm.
I was looking at being able to have more time with my family, being able to maybe go do stuff like fishing that I didn't get a lot of time to do, being outdoors more, going to the beach, or sticking with soccer for another 2 years and grinding it out, see where it went. And ultimately, I stuck it out. So I think my words of advice would fall along similar lines of take a step back,
Hmm.
but don't necessarily make a decision
Rashly.
based off of how you're feeling in the very moment. You
Yeah.
know, take some time to reflect on the experiences you've had, the things you've learned, the people you've met, and then decide from there.
Yeah. I think it's very important for student athletes to do what you said, take a step back. Um, and what Ben mentioned as well, obviously quitting is another story, and you don't necessarily call it quitting if you're having such a horrible time. But it's important for student athletes to realize it's okay to not continue if you're really not mentally there, mentally, physically, emotionally. If you can't do it, don't do it. And I think that's also what Ben meant too, is like if you cannot continue, don't force yourself. And I had a couple moments like this in my college career, and my coach was gracious enough to be like, Anya, don't come to practice for a week. Like, just take a step back. You do not need to force yourself to do something you mentally, physically, emotionally do not want to be involved in right now. And I said, amazing. And a lot of people don't have that opportunity, but a lot of that starts with a conversation with your coach. Um, which is very important to remember. So, to any current athletes watching this, don't be so hard on yourself. It's okay to take a step back. But for any retired student athletes watching this, I think it's important um, to take Ben's advice honestly, what he said, because I've noticed this, and I've talked to you a little bit about this, Matt, but I was weightlifting for about a year. And I weightlifted from like 2021 to 2022, the entire year straight. I was weightlifting and I liked it when I was doing it. I really fell in love with it. But a few months ago, I completely like lifting heavy weights was sounding horrible to me. I didn't want to do it. I mentally didn't like want to be in the gym. I just felt like I couldn't do it and I felt like I was forcing myself, and that is very unhealthy. So, I took a step back first, like you mentioned, but then I also was like, why am I doing this? Like, what really is the reason behind why I'm forcing myself to do this? Because I don't need to force myself. And like he says, just don't do it. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. So then I decided I'm going to run. And so I've just been running right now. And if I want to get back into lifting eventually, perfect. But if I don't, like, I don't need to force myself. And I think that's a very important message to remember as well.
Do you think that, you know, part of the reason why you were lifting, I feel like your ultimate goal probably was to look good, feel good, be healthy, right? So you had this kind of ultimate goal of wanting to feel comfortable in your own body,
Yeah.
feel good physically. And at some point, that lifting just didn't do it for you anymore. And so, because you still had that goal, you found something else in your life that would help you achieve that thing. And I think that's very important too, is making sure that as you're trying to progress as a person, is always keeping in mind what exactly do you want to achieve from what you're
Yeah.
doing. And if at the moment the thing you're doing doesn't really align with what you'd like, try something new. It's
Mhm.
not the easiest thing, but I mean, you've recently found a love for running,
Mhm.
and you're running crazy amounts of miles a week, and it's really cool to see how you've transitioned from that to something else.
Yeah. And I'm really glad you brought that up because as athletes, I feel like you always pretty much have a goal in mind. It's either we're winning conference, I want to score 10 goals this season. I want to have this many assists. You always kind of have a goal that you want. So yeah, if what you're doing doesn't align with your goals, take a step back, reevaluate, figure those goals out, and then have another stab at it. But I think that's some great advice that we touched on first. Next, I'd love to move on to Brandon Brickett's episode, and his episode was amazing. Also, I cannot pick a favorite on these episodes. Some people have asked me, but I genuinely loved my Zoom guests, and every one of them had something unique and amazing to say. And in Brandon's episode, he touches on the fact that you should take good help. Not every help is good help. Some help may hinder you, some help is not good help, but take good help from good people. And I literally think I just quoted that word for word because I've heard that little section of the Zoom series so much. Um, but my question is, how do you think accepting help has made you better or helped you since moving away from your sport?
I think it's really important to, especially what he said about taking good help.
Yeah.
For me, that means there's a lot of people in the world who have good intentions. And I feel like I've been in a position where I may have said something trying to help someone, but in reality, I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like that's kind of what he means by don't take everything you hear from people um, whole like with all intention of doing what they've said.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like an important thing when trying to receive guidance and help and get pushed in the right direction is to go toward people who you would consider to be role models.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like growing up, sometimes your parents aren't the best, especially when it comes to sports. Um, but I felt like my dad was very um, hard on me in a lot of ways with soccer because I would drive him crazy during the games because I wouldn't play the best I could. And then the games where I was giving it my all and 100% effort, he would give me that positive feedback. So I think I always turned to my dad growing up to receive that good help.
Mm-hmm.
And his words not only pushed me in a way that sometimes was frustrating because I would be frustrated with the game, I'd be frustrated with maybe some teammates, but ultimately his guidance was to push me to become the best that I could be. And there are other coaches that would do the same thing for me, and I'd turn to them. But yeah, there too many times there are too many voices in your head, and it's hard to choose the right one. But if you stick to people that you would consider role models, I feel like you're in good shape.
I'm really glad you brought that perspective up because when he said that, I wasn't even thinking the way that you just mentioned, which is great that we're having this discussion because when he originally said that, my mind immediately went to this summer and how I was able to pursue an internship in a different state and able to stay with family friends, and they were able to help me get to where I wanted to be in my career without having to pay rent, without having to pay for anything really besides feeding myself. So I immediately think of like people who have helped me physically and not necessarily like what you just mentioned, which is so important because you're right. Everyone is trying to tell you so much when you graduate. And even before you graduate, it's you need a job, you need a high paying job, and you need to live in a house and all this stuff, and everyone's telling you what you should be doing, and everyone's trying to give you advice on how to live and advice on how to go to the gym, how to stay active, all of this. And you're right, there's too many voices, there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and when there's too many cooks in the kitchen, nothing gets done. So I think it's very important to weed out that good advice from that bad advice and to really focus on I guess what we mentioned again, goals and just reaffirming what you want out of this experience and really internalizing good advice and good help. So I'm really glad you brought that point up. Transitioning more to social media, I wanted to talk about Grace Cosgrove's episode and how she talked about how horrible her mental health got as a female athlete. And I hear this a lot. As you would have heard through my other Zoom guests, I think I had a majority females and a majority of them answered when I asked them how the media had affected them. They had said that it almost negatively affected their body image, almost always. And I can say from personal experience, I've also been affected by the media for my body image as well. And Grace opened up and said it was really harmful. Social media was a really negative thing for her, and she had to turn it off. She had to stop looking at it. She had to delete apps because of it. So my question is, as a retired male athlete and or just an athlete, do you think that males are affected the same way as females from the media?
Totally, yeah, totally. I feel like um, I feel like lifting or the whole gym environment is a good kind of way to look at this. Um, I've never been comfortable in like an actual lifting gym, so I don't spend too much time there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but seeing how people are able to transform their body from being one physique to a completely different physique, it can be challenging. And in that aspect of like wanting to look a certain way, the
Yeah.
moment you start comparing yourself to other people you see on social media, that's when you kind of get into some deep water and it's really hard to get out because you're just constantly comparing yourself to them. And in my personal life, I necessarily haven't had issues with comparing my body image to other males, but I have compared kind of my life to my old teammates' lives. I played on a team where almost everyone was recruited.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there were a couple kids who didn't do anything after, but I had kids playing at Redlands, at Yale, at um, UCLA, like everywhere. And me, I'd see their pictures, I'd see their posts of traveling to different places, playing in the NCAAs, all this stuff. And I couldn't help but think to myself, well, who knows? Maybe that could have been you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. But that's kind of a drag because specifically in that time, I didn't really have much going for me. I was trying to figure out. I was in the middle of like a new move, so I was moving to a new state. Even though I was familiar with the state, it was still new. I was jumping into college. Didn't really have any hobbies, and so it was hard because I was always like, well, there was always this what if, and so I think that's the issue is you find yourself comparing yourself to everyone else around you.
Yeah.
And like I said, the moment you do that is kind of when you just get stuck.
Yeah. I'm glad that we're opening this discussion up because I feel like a lot of male athletes have a stigma that like they have to be strong all the time, along with all other athletes, but especially males. I feel like have to like put on a facade that they're okay and that social media doesn't affect them and that stuff doesn't affect them just because the discussion isn't being had. So I think it's very important that we're able to open this up and tell any current athletes, any retired student athletes that male or female, gender identity, however you identify, like you will have issues with the media. So in order to bring light to this topic, like we have to talk about it and we have to make people realize that the discussion is okay, that it's okay, that struggles are real, and no matter how you identify, you can still have struggle with the media. And before I move on to my next topic, just a reminder for everyone watching and listening that this is my 12th, yes, my 12th and my last Zoom series episode of After the Play Ends, Hanging the Cleats Up. And I'm joined today with Matt Wiscombe, who was my first Zoom series episode. So we're having a little Zoom series recap, a full circle moment, if you will, and just recapping our highs and our favorite episodes and our favorite topics from those episodes. So, Matt, I'd love to ask, is there any topics from any episodes that specifically jumped out to you that you'd like to discuss?
We've talked about some good ones. I'm not sure if this is in your program, but I recently listened to Steve
Mm-hmm.
Napier's. Is that going forward, or can we talk about that?
Yeah, of course, we can talk about that.
Cool. So he kind of talked about a few different things, but the thing that stuck out to me most was like the competitive nature that he internally had growing up. Um, and I could sort of connect with him on that level, but I think the thing that I enjoyed most about what he said and how he said it was he was coming at it at an angle that was very experienced in life.
Mm-hmm.
He's at a period in life where he's been able to live in so many different ways
Yeah.
and experience so many different things. And he's a father to a couple children, and so he's gone through some things with them. And having that perspective on life after sports was very interesting. And to hear specifically how he's transitioned from being an athlete to becoming a coach and dealing with other athletes was really cool.
Yeah. I think that one of the reasons I was so excited about Steve's episode is because he is not our generation. And most of the athletes that I had on, I think the oldest was 27. So that was the age range. It was like 21 to 27. So you had a little bit of a gap. You had some experience from graduation, but overall not much. So when we talked to Steve, I was so excited to get that more of a experienced and more of life behind what he was saying. And it's so interesting to hear how, I wouldn't say okay with everything, but you could tell there was such a difference between his mentality and his like the way he was like, "Yep, my sport's over," versus some of the other Zoom guests I had that were like you could tell how much they still missed it and how recent that like cut was, I guess you could say. Like it's still healing their wounds of not being an athlete anymore. But Steve was just like had a band-aid on that, like he was good to go. And I'm glad that you brought up the competitive nature because that's a topic I hadn't even thought of. And as someone who had done 11 episodes, or at that point I had already done 9 episodes, so I thought I had heard most of all of it. I thought I had heard body image and mental health and so many other topics, but I had not thought about competitive edge. And coming from soccer players, I mentioned this in Steve's episode. We are knocking people down. We're side tackling. We're getting in people's faces. We're all up in everyone's grill all the time. And that's one of the things I was so drawn to soccer was because we got to be competitive. We got to tackle people basically. Like it was so much fun. It's so much fun. So, how do you think? Because I know you're extremely competitive. I'm extremely competitive. How do you think that you can release that competitive edge in a healthy way?
It's been challenging. I feel like a lot of it I was able, especially after like graduating and stuff, a lot of it I was able to channel by playing with my siblings. I
Mm-hmm.
have a younger brother and an older brother. You've met Ben. My younger brother's Ryan. He's a fantastic soccer player. Um, but we would spend countless hours playing soccer together. Um, we would shoot, we would do one-on-ones, like whatever. And those were some serious moments
Yeah.
where it would get very competitive. And I recall not too long ago just getting absolutely obliterated by my little brother while we were playing in the park because he decided to slide tackle my ankles and almost break them.
Yeah,
And
there's
it's
nothing
pickup.
competitive like siblings, man.
No, no. So I feel like that's been one of the best ways for me to be able to channel it. But also learning how to just control it and not necessarily get rid of it because I think having a competitive nature is good in all things to
Mhm.
an extent. But recently, I don't feel as what's the word? I don't feel as inclined to always have the competitive edge
Mhm.
because as I haven't had the opportunities to be competitive, it's just kind of faded almost.
Mm.
Um, but recently I was asked to play in a scrimmage against the University of Utah's men's soccer club team. They don't have an NCAA team or anything like that, so they have a club team. So I got asked to play in a scrimmage, and I cannot wait for it.
Mhm.
It's because I just can't wait to get on the pitch, and I don't have anything to prove to anyone except myself, which is that I can still play. And
Yeah.
I know I can still play, but I haven't been able to play in a competitive game in I don't know how long. So I'm
Mhm.
really looking forward to that.
Yeah. And I think that's very like I think that's a very good thing for retired student athletes to look forward to is like maybe getting involved in a rec league, getting involved in something that can still help you get that competitive fire out because I honestly am not sure exactly what I'm gonna do. When I was thinking about it, I was like, I am extremely competitive. It comes out when I play board games, so beware. You know that. I'm kind of a
I do know that.
monster. I get really mean, guys. Um, so that's when that comes out. But also like I've learned to be very competitive with myself. So running has really helped me too, and being able to like push myself further than I did last time and beat myself, if that makes sense at all. I don't know if that helps any retired athletes, but just having like, if you've only ran 7 miles before and being like, no, I can run 8, and then just running one more and then being like, holy crap, like I just ran 8 miles, like, look at me. And it makes you feel like you just beat yourself, like your old self. That kind of like drives me a little bit too, which is what I've noticed. Are there any other ways that you've been able, or any advice you could give to any retired student athletes to let that competitive fire out?
In anything competitive, your objective is to, I would say, be the best you
Yeah,
can be.
yeah,
Um, and so that typically correlates with like sports.
yeah.
But I mean, being a retired athlete, you can totally find those things where your whole purpose of doing them is to enjoy them, number one, but also to improve.
Mm-hmm.
Um, recently, I know you've picked up rock climbing a little bit, and I've picked up bouldering. You know, I've gone through a little spell where I've fallen off, and I'm so frustrated. And yesterday, I had a really good day. I was back on the wall doing some harder climbs that I couldn't do before, and so it's just a constant motivation and constant desire to become better.
Mm-hmm.
And having that type of competitive aspect on everything, I think is one of the best ways to channel that inner competitive nature that might be inside all these athletes
Yeah,
and continue on with it.
exactly. Yeah, just the little things, just picking up little hobbies and getting that competitive spirit out, playing board games, all kinds of stuff. You can be competitive in all kinds of stuff. But with our last bit, I would love to use this time to talk about why I chose to have the Zoom series in the first place. A lot of people have asked me, why don't you do a podcast? And it's very interesting because most of my capstone classmates have done a podcast, which is all voices, obviously, like you guys know. But I chose a Zoom series, and I'm not even going to lie when I say I chose the Zoom series because I do not know how to work my podcast room in my mass communications building. That is almost wholeheartedly why I chose to do this Zoom series. And I told my professor that, one of my professors that, and she started cracking up. And I said, but I'm not gonna lie, I am like I did also choose this because we're having more of a personal connection. We're able to sit down and I'm able to see you. I'm able to see when you smile, when you get excited about something, when you get passionate about something, and we can have like more of a human connection than we could on the phone. And that's what I wanted out of this too. There's a statistic by the NCAA that says only 2% of college athletes end up playing professionally. And what happens to the other 98%? The other 98% is us and so many of the guests that I've had. And those people all look different. They sound different. They act differently. And I want to see those emotions on screen. I don't want to just hear them. So that's also why I chose it. So there is a bigger reason than that reason. But I just thought it was kind of funny to share that with you guys. I also chose retired student athletes as my main topic because we don't have a resource. I don't know about you. Actually, I do. In high school, we never had a resource of people saying, this is what's going to happen. You guys are like totally going to lose your identity of a sport that you've played since you were 3. Nobody tells you that. Nobody prepares you for what's going to happen after college, after high school, when you stop your sport. Stopping your sport, no matter what age you are, is like insanely hard, and nobody talks about it. That's why I chose retired athletes as my topic, because I'm also close to a lot of retired athletes. I'm in the community, so I thought I would keep that topic close to me, but also try to help some people along the way and try to bring light to this situation. Lastly, I'd like to end with asking you, Matt, how beneficial do you think it would be for student athletes to have some sort of a resource or a guidebook like this Zoom series in after retiring?
Super beneficial. I don't consider my whole experience with being a retired athlete very extreme,
Mm-hmm.
but for those people who make it to the pros, for example, and end up playing an extra 10 years or whatever, imagine going from playing your entire life, your entire existence basically, and then one day not having it.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine how hard that would be. And just being able to talk to someone, I
Yeah.
feel like would be super beneficial. As I've watched the series, I've found it interesting to, as you mentioned, see the differences in everyone, but
Mm-hmm.
also see how similar we are.
Yeah.
And I think it's super easy to walk around in public and look at someone and go, "Wow, he looks well dressed," or "She looks really successful," when in reality they have their own issues.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's going through something, and especially I know you live in an area where it's specifically athletes. You're surrounded by a bunch of athletes, and I'm sure each of them have had their struggles and are going through their things. So having an outlet to communicate to someone about what you're going through, also being surrounded by other people who are going through something similar can be very beneficial. So um like you said, I don't know of anything that is available to people
Yeah.
to reach out to. But this series for me has been very interesting and very helpful in understanding how people think, and also um, helping me understand that the things that I felt are okay to feel,
Yeah.
and it's not out of the ordinary or wrong, and that it's okay to be struggling.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the biggest thing that I wanted to bring to the table, is to show that we're not alone. Student athletes, you have a community. There's so many people like you going through similar things, and it's so important to have a resource, a guide, anything, a counselor, someone you can talk to, reach out to. So hopefully this Zoom series was able to help some student athletes or some retired student athletes out there. I am so extremely thankful for every single one of my guests. Thank you so much, Matt, and my other 10 guests on my Zoom series after the play ends, hanging the cleats up. And this was my 12th and last Zoom series. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much for all my guests and listeners who have joined me and watched me throughout this process. I'm so grateful for this series and for this opportunity. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thank you.